Hi, I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. Today, we're going to look at things a little bit differently. We've tried to merge, consumer trends, economics, but we decided let's break this out. Let's really focus in and hone in on what's happening with the consumer, what's happening with the economy overall, because it really impacts everyone, not just within energy. We'll do a quick introduction of how this ties into the OPEC, just because into OPEC and to the EIA, just why not? Because we love it so much. But it'll just be a quick introduction right into consumer trends. So let's really dive in right now, just because let's just take a quick snapshot as to where we are on the OPEC levels. So here you can see, inventories have come down, product inventories are starting to trend lower. Gasoline, again, is following that trend down, but we're going to look at, how is driving behavior really adjusting? Total inventories have come in a little bit, but again, the total inventories are inclusive of everything, and we're just not seeing that drawdown that we really should this time of year. Gasoline is trying its hardest, but again, we're seeing the stickiness in other products, specifically distillate and jet fuel, where they're just not seeing this movement. And when we think about, what's happening across our favorite three locations of US, Japan, and Fujairah, the trend is continuing to move in our favor, but it's really not being driven by the US as much as it is based on Fujairah coming down and Japan as well. And even though this looks like, things are moving in the right direction, we're seeing some builds in some other regions that is going to offset this. And the reason why that's problematic is because those exports, specifically in Japan, continue to fall with industrial production hitting new lows, even though they're coming back and reopening. Now, when we talk about reopening, you have to consider, what is happening on a global level. Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, some of these areas have seen a spike in cases, and they're reacting aggressively to try to offset and to get in front of some of these increases. And that's why even though we're seeing some of these drawdowns, shipping is going to continue to be a problem, just because we're not seeing the same type of exports, imports from Japan. China's still low, but again, China's increased a little bit. US is still down 12%. Japan's still down. South Korea, again, down about 17%. These are things that are going to continue to be problematic as things move along. And when we consider about things moving along, the easiest place to get to all these areas that we talked about is by flying. And here you can see that we've had a bigger decline in terms of where the movements are. So when we look at the TSA data, again, the blue line being last year, white line being this year, the trend is still shifting higher, but we had a much bigger step back. And again, the bigger drop was that July 4th, because you have people traveling, then you have the big reduction because you had the additional day off. So we should see that move, as you saw from last year. You saw that big drop off. The problem on this move lower is that there's really nothing there outside of the fact that you've had a resurgence in COVID in some destinations, specifically being California, abroad. So you're starting to see some of this, people holding back from traveling again. So we still think we hold between that kind of 550 to 750, but this is something to watch as things roll off. And we saw Delta respond. Delta was going to bring back 1,000 flights in August. Now it's 500. We're starting to see some more furloughed employees across the other airlines. So this is something that's going to be a problem. And you might think, maybe they're driving instead. And the short answer is no. We're not seeing the movement that we should, given where people sit in the world. And this is something that we're continuing to see on the mobility data. Again, parks remain a key focus. My wife has signed up for something, and she gets alerts on when a park is closed because it's too full in New York, or this one is below average for this time of day. So it kind of helps direct you. And again, Google's tracking your life, and sometimes that's very frightening when you think about it. But it also provides some opportunity. It's like, I can go here because there's less people. And here you see that there's the trend continues to remain up, but again, we're starting to flatten out, and you're starting to see that more and more with workplaces and some of these residential and transit stations. So people still aren't taking public transportation. People still aren't going to the workplace because that work from home continues to be stickiness within the market. And that's something that's being rolled back out in some of these areas that are seeing an increase in spikes. And now, something that consumes my wife's brain on a regular basis is school. Where are my 3 kids going to go to school? Are they going to go to school? Is there going to be a Zoom or something else? And, Houston just announced that they're going to start the year on virtual and then, potentially go face to face. So these are things that are going to be a problem, because if your kid is home, can you really go back to work? What is that work from home going to look like? What does that work-life balance look like? And just to put it into context, because I talk about New York, it's where I live, it's where I'm from, but what is really driving the market? Where do we see the most miles driven? Now, this is the Department of Transportation for May. Again, old data. The mobility data is much more relevant in terms of what's happening right now, but it gives you an idea of where do we drive the most. And people will talk about, well, the Northeast, no one's going to take public transit. Yes, which is true, but you're going to work from home more just because the roads, the LIE, you might as well ride a bike. But it's also not a place that we earn a lot of these miles driven. It's really coming from the West, the South Gulf, the South Atlantic, North Central. And these are the areas that are seeing the biggest increases in COVID cases. So that's why you're starting to see these miles driven come down. So May was obviously better than June. July, June is going to be better than May, just given where things are. But July is going to be the problem. July is going to be that moved lower again, just because this is where people are going back into some form of lockdown. Driving is minimizing. We've seen it in gas buddy data, in EIA data, and it will be reflected here as it will be in the pump. And that's going to be a hindrance for where things are happening on a global level. And when we think about globally, Google, again, you're seeing more and more people spending more time at home. Some of these countries, specifically in Latin America, have gone from only 10% to 20 to 30%. And you're starting to see this rollback as these concerns grow, specifically in areas of India, Japan, Hong Kong, we get some of these adjustments, which is going to be a problem because it's hard to get back to normal. You're seeing some of these manufacturing, some of these industrial areas roll back. And this is why we continue to focus on this data, because it's changing. It's alive and well. And, we're starting to see some of these COVID cases really result in more people staying within their residence. But again, we want to really look at what's happening on the workplace side. And we remain at about 50% or so, or 50 to 75% staying home. And this is something that is going to be, how permanent, how long. We don't see this really adjusting anytime in, let's just say the next couple of months, 2-3 months right now. And again, it's a question of what we have a spike. So during these spikes, don't come to the office. Okay, the spikes are coming back, but do we bring kids back? Do we not bring kids back? And that's when we start getting into the August and September questions of, how do these adjustments really work through the system? And as we think about these adjustments, you have to consider what's happening at the restaurant level. And we're starting to see the restaurants continue to, as July 13th, 14th, less people going to restaurants. In dining is now out again. Bars are going to close unless they sell food. There's all these different issues in terms of large gatherings. As long as you're protesting, you can gather. But if you want to go to a bar or a diner or restaurant, you can. So again, that's its own issues. But when we look at this, you can see there's less people showing up. And that's a trend that we think is going to get worse as the rollbacks of phases, or however they want to phrase it, starts to impact. And when we look at the impact, we have to look at it on a global level. And you're starting to see some of these issues come back into effect in specific locations. Like Australia has a little bit of a spike. You're seeing that come back a little bit. But the issue remains within the US, UK. Now, the UK is normalizing a bit. We're starting to see a little bit more reduction. Germany is now positive. And, the trend is obviously during the weekend, but we're looking at this on a apples to apples basis. And you're seeing in Germany, things are a little bit better. But again, it's a give or take as to where you are, what the situation is. So this is something that we think on a global level, we're going to hang around 65%, which has kind of been the average for most of this. It's hard to see how this doesn't get a little bit worse through the end of July as some of these new phases take effect and the spike in COVID adjusts the way people go about their normal daily lives. Now we're going to go through some key economic indicators that have come out. Just some interesting facts from Q2 earnings, but at the same time looking at what's happening on a global level. Where is the economy going? What's the macro look like? So right here, we kind of jump right in and just look at bank bad debt provisions. So this is typically a spot where people are going to assume, and by people, I mean banks, are assuming, what is going to be bad debt? What is going to be a huge expense and a write-off because they're just not going to get their money back? And just going back to 2015, you can go back further and you're going to see a similar spike, not to this level, but you'll see a similar spike in 08, 09. Some of the spikes will be similar depending on the bank, but here you see the huge, increase. And they're also saying that things are going to get a little bit worse. This is what they think. It could be better. Some of this stuff might come off of bad debt expense and get put back on the sheets. But when you think about, all of the bankruptcies we've seen from the retail energy side, restaurants, residential, people, deferring their mortgage for X amount of time, it makes sense to think that some of this pain is really going to be real. And depending on how quickly we come back, this is going to be something that's going to not only, it's just going to go higher, especially given the amount of debt that's currently available. There's just more debt now to get put on a bad debt provision, just because there's so much debt on a global level, not just on a consumer level, but on a consumer, corporate, and sovereign capacity. So this is something to continue to watch as it could really weigh on the market. Just as the banking sector is going to struggle to handle some of these write-offs. And then when we look at the Empire State Manufacturing Survey, some of this better data. We came off hard from the bottom, and you're starting to see this resurgence. But the question is, what is the resurgence coming in? Here we have the manufacturing side, but employment continues to be weak. And that's something that it's good to see things coming back, things turning back on, the employment data is showing you that they're really not turning on to the same level, and they're not hiring back people at the same pace. So, but again, you have to start somewhere, and seeing these kind of numbers, on across the board, some of the GDP expectations have gotten a little bit better. Some of the leading indicators have gotten a little bit better. These are things that are positive to see. The question is going to be, how is this going to impact us going forward with some of these additional shutdowns and some of these COVID spikes? Are they going to be consistent? Are we going to see this translate into more deaths, into infrastructure issues? These are problems that we really need to consider as we go through July and into August to really think of, okay, well, was this a flash in the pan and now we're going to kind of go sideways or roll over? And when we look at some other metrics, the small business actual earnings, you can see how far down they've come. Now, the bulls out there will say, okay, well, we knew this. I mean, Q2 was going to be bad. The question was going to be how bad. Now we're starting to say, oh, it was bad and then even worse. But again, back to the production, some of those things will recover. We're starting to see some of that normalization. The problem is it's at a higher price. So, the mitigation for PPE, for consumer safety, for employee safety, these are costs that are necessary and real, which will impact margin. So even though your revenue may go up, you may have a margin tightness just because it's your costs and your cost of goods sold are going to weigh against you. Again, this also shows the divergence with the financials and the real economy with the actual market itself, which continues to go in this weird circle of pumps and how we can keep the stock prices elevated, but we need to continue to see what is Q2 going to look like, and are we going to get guidance? Because if you remember back in Q1, companies pulled guidance because they're like, look, You don't know where we're going. We don't know where we're going. We're just going to try to manage this the best we can. And I think that's going to continue to reverberate through the system, especially as we go through Q3. And then we'll have a bit more guidance of, okay, well, Europe's getting a little bit better. Asia's a little bit better. We're coming out of some of these additional rollbacks, and things can get a bit more normalized. And then we can start talking about what 2021 looks like. But as much as Europe continues to normalize on a COVID level, they were also in a world of hurt in terms of what 2018 into 2019 looked like. 2019, things were already slowing. You already had PMIs that were down. You already had things that were being problematic. So it shouldn't be crazy to think that that output is still below where it should be. And it's really because, again, April into May, we know that June is going to be a little bit better, but it's going to be better on a percentage that's still well below zero, just because the PMIs were coming off of such a weak footing in 2019. So not only do you have the COVID impact, but you also have the impact of just economic cycles. Now you have an issue in terms of a fight between the US and Europe. Are there going to be sanctions? What are we going to do with Nord Stream 2? We took away some benefits in terms of we reinstituted some sanctions. So again, these are things that are going to continue to hinder where are exports, where are imports, where is the consumer. And again, as a tourist, I mean, who's going to these countries? You're going to probably stay home in 2020 and consider your Italian vacation or your German vacation, sometime in 2021. So these are things to consider as we look forward into their economic prowess. And again, you have to think about the emerging markets. The emerging markets continue to struggle. And here's just, I thought it was very well done in terms of what the daily activity indicators are showing, really kind of looking at those leading indicators that we can, figure out like what is happening. Are things getting a little bit better? Are they trending lower? And here you've seen, we've come off real aggressively off that bottom, but we've kind of leveled off, and the level off is a bigger problem, because again, emerging markets were already struggling in 2019. And now this is just adding fuel to the fire. Now, the big ones to look at that we continue to kind of is obviously China, but also India. China and India are going to be those big bellwethers. And China, while they've, quote unquote, recovered to a certain extent, they've been stuck at 87%. So you can think like, oh, well, they lie, they do this. Okay, that's fine. Like, maybe they turn it on and then they don't really turn those factories on. But it's still at 87%. They were at 97%, 98% prior to this. So they haven't been able to close that 10%, and they were the first ones in, first ones out. So now India sitting here at about 60%. Are they really going to get that 80%? Are they really going to be able to close that gap? And that's why we think there's going to be a bigger problem. And when we think of the bigger problem, you have to consider, what do emerging markets really rely on? And it's really those imports, exports. And the advanced economies, based on this chart, are really the ones that are going to pull through some of these products. So if the advanced economies are well below 100 and have only recovered back to 75%, do they really have the capacity to go to those emerging markets and purchase more goods, or do additional trades, or do investments in those countries, whether it be manufacturing, electrical, just in general infrastructure? And again, we've seen China peaked in June at that 87%, and you have seen that come back. They're probably closer to 85%. Again, whether they lie or not, they're still not back at 100. And that's going to be a continuous problem as you have COVID continuing to be problematic with their trade partners. So it's going to be this give and take. And that's why to assume that we're just going to snap right back is going to be very hard, given that COVID cases continue to rise on a global level, which is going to just impact imports and the way the consumer behaves. Now, we talk about the consumer, we talk about China. This is a great map that we're just going to use for a little bit longer. Things have started to calm down a little bit. They've India and China here have pulled away from this divide. They've pulled back to secondary positions. They still have their reinforcements. They still have people sitting there. But there's a lot of different signals happening right now, and there's a lot of different moving parts right at this point. You had Japan, who joined India for naval exercises. You have India, putting subs at the Strait of Malacca. You have Thailand, you have the 9-dash line, and along the 9-dash line, you have the Philippines, which got very aggressive, saying like, look, China is encroaching, and the U.S. has finally come out and said, look, the 9-dash line is irrelevant. We were just defaulting to the UN, saying, oh, well, the UN said it was wrong, so therefore it's wrong. Now we're coming out and saying not only is what the UN said correct, we actually agree with it, and that's going to be part of our policy. So it's a small increase. It's just taking the rhetoric to the next level. We've held a live fire drill with South Korea. We ran B-2 bombers through the Taiwan Strait, and now we had 2 aircraft carrier groups in the South China Sea, and now one of them is in the Indian Ocean. And you have to consider we're showing the fact that, like, look, we're taking this serious. You need to take this serious as well in terms of what the trade war really looks like, because we're never going to hit the phase 1 trade deal. Phase 2 is dead and gone. And now the rhetoric is getting worse. Hong Kong, we passed laws against Hong Kong. We now have sanctioned specific people within China. They're now increasing their rhetoric against us. This is a flashpoint. And the more military equipment that is next to each other, you can always risk a incident, whether by accident on purpose or something that was on an accident, and then you just pretend it was on purpose. And this is how things escalate. So again, this is a geopolitical powder keg that we'll continue to look at and really kind of evaluate, are things getting worse, getting better? India and China on the better side, U.S.-China relations, continuing to get worse, and Japan and South Korea are happy to join our side. And you're starting to see some of those South China Sea countries say, look, we think this is going to be a bigger concern. And then when we talk about the Three Gorge Dam and what's happening within China, the Three Gorge Dam, if it were to fail, not to say it will, but there is a small chance that it could. You're talking about 400 million people that would be impacted, multiple nuclear facilities, different industrial facilities. And you've already seen this is unprecedented flooding within these regions. And they've already had to open up all spillways to try to just mitigate the damage that's behind the dam. And you've already seen flooding. You've already seen death. You've already seen industrial production slow down. So again, the Three Gorge Dam is something where we're never really going to know for sure what's happening, but we do know that there is flooding. It's more than that even they expected, and you're seeing that with their crop purchases. They're losing crops, both rice and corn, so they're going out and purchasing more. And this is only going to make things worse when we consider what is happening with food security, food prices, food inflation. So again, these are things that people do go to war over food. We have since we crawled out of caves, and that's not going to change today. So these are things that we're always going to look at, to close on a positive note. We're getting closer to the weekend. Things are getting there. We have a potential vaccine, which would be a great move, not just from, that would be nice to have to make people feel a little bit more comfortable. Whether it works or not, we're still in that phase 3 testing, but we can always hope for something better than the COVID world we live in today. So thanks again for watching. I'm Mark Rossano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. Thanks again.